Hi champions, here is a video for you on principles of practice. And full disclosure, I learned many of these techniques from Mike Seeklander a number of years ago. They have been incorporated in the 0 Points Down sports shooting training programs, and I'm just putting them together for you today in an easy to grasp and easy to apply guide. There's 7 of these principles of practice. The first principle is that training or practice is only as good as the principles that you apply. Okay, so your training will be determined, the quality of your training is going to be determined by the quality of the principles that you apply. And this is what makes up most of their quality. Purpose. Live or dry, the drills must have a purpose. And you will sometimes find when you're on the range with shooters, perhaps on a practice day, they'll say to you, yeah, you've got to do this drill, got to do that drill, come and do this drill. And you might go and do it. Or beforehand, you might say, what is the why behind your drill? Why are you shooting that specific drill in the way that you're shooting it? And if it's just because it's fun, then maybe you ought to rethink that within the context of whether you are a 1, 2, or 3 shooter. Remember, the number 1 shooter, he's social, shoots on occasion for a social time, a good time. Number 2 is somebody that is a competitive shooter, more serious, a lot more serious and a lot more regular about his shooting. And number 3 is a shooter that is shooting and training and practicing to win. So when you're talking about fun drills, you decide whether you are a 1, 2, or 3 shooter. Remember that every time you do something with a gun, you are creating a neural pathway. You are using myelination to create a pathway from your brain to your hands. And you want to learn stuff that is useful to you in terms of your skill development. So in a defensive or sport shooting context, whatever you are practicing and training must work for you when it's applied within that context. Manipulation. Manipulation is basically anything to do generally with the working of the gun, the fundamentals of the firearm, when you are working it, reloading it, drawing it, holstering it, racking the slide, aiming, shooting, whatever, your manipulation. And that is largely learnt in dry fire. You all understand the advantages of dry fire, otherwise you wouldn't be on this program. It doesn't cost a lot of money, it can be done anywhere, it doesn't make a noise, and it works your fundamentals into a very good and consistent place. In live fire, that is the only place that you will learn to shoot better, where you will learn to manage the sighting, the aiming system and the sights, in conjunction with recoil and trigger to actually get the shots that you're looking for. So very much important to understand in manipulation just how far dry fire will take you and what the limits are and what you need to do, why you need to do live fire to learn certain of the other skills and test them and measure them. Your context. It's very important that whatever context you're training in, it's relevant to what you're going to shoot. The gear that you're using and the gun that you're using must be relevant to what you're trying to learn. So my go-to gun in a defensive situation here at Gecko Rock may be different to my sport shooting gun. In fact, it is different to my sport shooting gun. So your training must consider the context of what you are developing. You need to train with the gear that you actually intend to use in the manner in which you intend to use it. Okay, so coming to a training session full of kit and magazines and stuff that you won't use in a defensive shooting situation or in a sport shooting situation, for instance, an inside waistband holster for sport shooting or outside waistband holster for defensive use, it's not in context. Okay, you need your shooting in context. Correctness, every single thing, every movement, as I said earlier, creates a neural pathway, it creates a habit. And training something over and over and over again requires you to make sure that your training is 100% correct every time. If you are approaching a training session and you're feeling lackadaisical about it, or you're not completely focused on doing the right thing all the time, then don't do it, because you're going to be training and reinforcing the wrong signals for your subconscious, for your manipulation techniques. Understand the technique and how to do it properly, and understand, importantly, why you do it. Consistency. You have to be consistent in terms of what you're doing. So if you are timing yourself and your progress on an L-press, then make sure that you use the L-press all the time for timing and measuring those skills. Don't change the distance on the L-press and then say, oh, well, I've got worse or I've got better. So go closer and say, oh, well, I'm shooting the L-press much better now or much faster. No, you're not. You're shooting it more easily because you're closer to the targets. So stay consistent in the measurement of what you are doing in your training. And if you want to be really consistent, make sure that you are using a notebook. I can now finally confirm that I am thoroughly and completely using a notebook on every dry fire session and on every match. And in between that, those times when I'm thinking about my shooting and I want to make a note of something. And it is becoming enormously useful to me. It's causing me to think about my shooting in a very specific and very precise way, and to spend my capital of time and facilities and resources wisely. Your failure point cycle. In your practice, going to the failure point cycle, in other words, pushing your times and your speeds as fast as possible until you start failing with your accuracy, is a technique to highlight where you are failing. And you can say to yourself, the faster I can get the hits I want, the better. However, by adding speed until there is a failure on accuracy, and then to stop and analyze what's going on, look at the failure, identify what's happened, confirm with another shoot of that same drill at the same sort of pace if you can, that you're getting the same result, and then decide why you are failing. Create a remedy and test it again. So the failure point cycle is very important. If you don't push yourself to the point of failure, you won't know if you are going as fast as you can. You won't understand if you have got spare capacity to shoot better. So push yourself in dry and live fire to the point of failure. The point of failure in a reload, a slide lock reload, is pushing yourself to the point that you start fumbling the insertion of that magazine, or that you're dropping the slide before the magazine is in properly. That's your failure point cycle. And that's where you can take a step back and say, why was I doing this? Why out of the last 15 times, 3 times I dropped the slide before the magazine was properly inserted, and I ended up with an empty chamber, which on a match would have cost me click, oh, rack, back again and shoot. 1.5 seconds, for instance, and maybe bad shots after that. So look for the failure point cycle and push it until you get there. Your priorities in your training, whether it's reloads, draws, strong hand, support hand, kneeling, prone, whatever the technique is that you are practicing, if everything is a priority, then nothing is a priority. Select initially and during your mainstay of your dry fire and live fire a smaller number of drills to practice and perfect. Do them until you can move forward by increasing the distance, increasing the speed or decreasing the time, or doing both together, and start pushing yourself towards results, and you understand what your priorities are. Use them like building blocks. There's no point in rushing through stuff at high speed if you have not got the fundamentals mastered. When would you, as an experienced shooter, need to revisit the fundamentals? When you haven't shot for a lot of time, when you've had an injury that is affecting the way that you grip a gun or manage recoil. When you change something on your gun, you might have had a nice fat mag well, and now because you're choosing to shoot in another division or another discipline, you can't have your mag well working for you. You might have changed your magazine release, you might have changed your sighting system. That's when you need to go back to building your fundamentals, a step at a time. Concentrate on your priorities. I'll see you guys on the TV, same time, same place.